Hello everyone and welcome back to the Mech Lab, where we try to be a better mech commander every day. Today I wanted to talk to you about the different categories of weapons that there are. Now obviously you have Gauss rifles and LRMs and lasers and all kinds of different things. But a really core tenet of force building in BattleTech is taking these two kinds of weapons, and the two kinds of weapons are piercing weapons, weapons that will open up armor like the AC-20 or an LB-10 or a PPC, these kinds of things. They do a lot of damage to one single area when they hit. And the reason why that's important is because if you hit a single area with, say, 10 damage or 20 damage, for example, let's say we hit the hunchback in the left torso with 20 damage from this AC-20. Now the left torso is open, and any weapons that hit in that location again are going to start rolling for criticals. And in the left torso, there's ammo. So you can blow that ammo up and potentially just explode this hunchback on the spot. But weapons that deal a lot of damage to a single location tend to be really heavy and very inefficient. They often have very high heat, or they just cost so much tonnage that you can't really take more than one or two on a mech. Whereas crit-seeking weapons come in like a couple of different flavors. You have really efficient weapons like medium lasers that deal like a medium amount of damage and aren't really meant for crit seeking. They're more meant for just being really efficient at dealing out damage for their tonnage and for their heat. But the real crit seeking weapons are like small lasers, for example, which are again also more so a very efficient weapon that you would want in a very niche case. Like maybe you've got a fast hover with a bunch of small lasers on it that's really mobile and capable of getting those small lasers on top of the enemy so that it can deliver a really big punch. Or it's going to be weapons that roll on a cluster table that can hit more than once per each shot. For example, we've got a Centipede Scout car here, has 6 SRM-2s, so not only is it going to be firing off 6 shots, which means that at minimum it's firing off a lot of shots that can potentially hit something. Each of these shots can hit more than once, potentially. So if you really ace the dice here, you could fire off these 6 SRM-2s and get 12 hits on the enemy. And obviously that's going to destroy the entire left torso, but with the way that rolling for damage locations works, you're not likely to hit the left torso more than a couple of times. So cluster weapons like LRMs or SRMs or LBX cannons are really going to be your main cluster weapons. In later eras, you've got things like Hyper Assault Gauss or Silver Bullet Gauss, but mainly if you're looking at crit-seeking weapons, you want like SRMs, or if you want them on a long-range mech, you want LRMs or LBX cannons. And the great thing about LBX cannons is that they do double duty, right? They've got normal autocannon ammo, so they can do that 5 or 10 damage per shot, and then they also have cluster ammo, so they can shoot something and get a whole bunch of little 1 damage shots all over the place. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that mechs with ferrolamellar armor are actually immune to LBX cluster rounds if you're firing at their armor. So don't be a silly boy like me and fire off a cluster round at a ferrolam mech and expect it to do anything. The other really great thing about cluster weapons is that they hit so many times that there's a pretty good likelihood of you getting, say, a through armor critical on the torso and maybe getting a gyro crit and knocking the mech down, or getting a couple of head hits out of them. So there is a legitimate strategy where you just take nothing but cluster weapons and hope for lucky head hits or through armor criticals. That can work, and it can be surprisingly effective against, say, a list like Miserable Meat Mountain, where you have 4 or 5 heavy mechs that you're facing down that are going to take a lot of punishment to kill, but if you just spam a bunch of headshots on them, you can just knock the pilot out. Now, I mentioned efficiency weapons like the medium laser. Having a good number of weapons that just deal a lot of raw damage is also another legitimate strategy. So for example, the Hunchback 4P is a really great mech because it just has so many shots. Maybe you need 10s because you're fighting a locust swarm and the enemy just keeps running circles around you. Well, hey, if you've got 5, 10, 15 medium lasers that you can fire off at that locust on 10s, I mean, some of those are probably going to hit, just based on statistical likelihood. But what I think is a great strategy is to have a couple of big piercing weapons, like maybe some Gauss rifles or PPCs or LB-10 cannons, and then have other mechs that have a good amount of either really efficient weapons like medium lasers or crit-seeking weapons like SRMs. And again, LBX cannons, especially the LB-10, are really, really efficient. So taking a whole bunch of LB-10s in your list is pretty much never a bad idea. So the next time you're building a list, just keep in mind that you probably want to have some really powerful piercing weapons, and you also want to have a good mix of high efficiency weapons that will deal lots of damage, and a few crit-seeking weapons so that you can take advantage of those exposed components. So for example, instead of taking 2 Hunchback 4Gs, I would probably recommend taking 1 Hunchback 4G and then a Hunchback 4P along with it. This makes them a really effective combo. The AC-20 can open up components, and then the medium lasers follow up, and not only can they do some crit seeking, they're also just going to be really efficient and do a lot more damage overall than the single AC-20 and pair of medium lasers that the Hunchback 4G has, especially if you're dealing with a situation where the chances of hitting aren't particularly good. And just keep in mind that medium lasers, medium pulse lasers, small X-pulse lasers, all of these weapons that deal like a reasonable amount of damage or are very accurate and weigh about a ton and don't have too much heat, these are all really good weapons that you want to bring for efficiency purposes. Whereas things like large lasers or PPCs tend to be very inefficient because they're extremely heavy and they have high heat, meaning that you're going to have to bring a crap ton more heat sinks in order to run them. And I mean, if you're just talking about hunchbacks, consider maybe taking something like the Hunchback 4H, which has a little bit more range on its main weapon. It doesn't deal quite as much damage, but that's still a good piercing hit that will get close to opening up a single component, and it has a little bit more raw, efficient damage to back it up. Anyways, that's it for today, everyone. Thank you for stopping by the Mech Lab. I hope that this helps you become a better mech commander. Please like, share, and subscribe if you are enjoying the content. Really helps me out. And have a great day, everyone.